Hello and welcome to another week of chess openings where we continue our dissection of the Alekhine's defense and how you can use it to help your game in the game of chess as black. Last video we went over the modern variation, which is the mainline theory for the Alekhine's defense, but there may be times where white forces your hand and you're going to encounter the exchange variation. So what does that look like going forward? To go over what we went over in the last video, the Alekhine's defense is a black opening where when white goes to e4, black moves its knight to g6. The white pawn will move up to e5. We evade it by going to d5 with the knight. White moves its pawn to d4, and we bring our pawn up to d6, challenging the pawn here on e5. Now, in the modern variation, they bring their knight out here to f3, but an exchange variation is when white brings the pawn over here to c4, attacking the knight and forcing it to retreat over here to b6. Now from here, they can continue this attack, which would be kind of foolish for them. So the best thing for them to do is to take the pawn over here on d6, and we take with the e7 pawn. The reason we don't want to take with the c6 pawn is it traps our bishop in from developing quickly. By taking with the e7 pawn, we open up both our bishop lines and are able to develop in a much quicker way. Now, there are four main exchange variations, all developing on what happens on the 7th and 8th move. So on the 6 moves, it will always go white moving its knight to c3, we moving our bishop to e6, creating a block of the king and also opening up an attack line here and fortifying this pawn as well. Now, the first variation we're going to be looking at is what happens when white moves its bishop to e3, fortifying this pawn and creating an additional layer of attack on the knight. When this happens, all we want to do is castle and continue playing from there. We do not want to take directly here because the bishop is watching this pawn. We might want to look at something where we're going to move our pawn over here to c5, but what we want to do is get this king out of danger right away. Quick, before we do anything else, please drop a like on the video below. It really helps me with the algorithm. Please don't let the second variation is on the 7th move, the bishop going to d3, and on the 8th move, we're going to look at the knight going to g2. So the knight falls back, the pawn comes through. We take with the e7 pawn. Knight to c3 comes out, we go bishop to e7, and this time instead of going bishop to e3, we get bishop to d3. We're still going to castle. White should bring its knight over here to e2, fortifying this pawn and creating a potential attack patterns. We bring out our knight to also bring a threat to that pawn. White castles. We bring the rook to take control of this file, and white continues to fortify this pawn chain right here. We kick up this pawn here to try to disrupt this pawn structure later on. And from here, white has like a half pawn advantage, and the queen side is the most overloaded part of the board where there's about to be a showdown in a number of different ways. The nice thing about the Alekhine is there's not a lot of theory behind it. This is like probably the most theory heavy, this is just offering you a good starting point of what to do in these situations. Next, we're going to be looking at the bishop to d3 and knight to f3 variation. So we go through exchange, bring the bishop over here to e7, and we get the bishop to d3. We castle, and this time they bring the knight over here to f3 instead of bringing the knight to f3. Still defending this pawn here. We will kick out this white light squared bishop to open up attack lines here, and white will push up the pawn to b3. We can kick it up to d5 here to break open the center, because now we have 3 attackers compared to the 2 defenders here. White can then push, attacking our knight, causing us to retreat and bringing us more inward. Another variation that we can look at from here is if when we go to bishop to e6, we get, instead of going to b3, we can get queen to e2, staring down on this weakness of the bishop. What we'll want to do is bring in the rook. White will castle. We'll bring out that bishop to attack this pawn, even though it is covered by the knight. Blue will bring an extra defender of that pawn, and we'll push up trying to open the center. White then pushes up attacking the knight. We then thrust ourselves in. Even though we're attacked by the bishop, we have the pawn defense here and are creating attack lines in multiple different ways, attacking the bishop, attacking that pawn. White should take. We take with our pawn, and white should move the rook over to from a to d1. Black then moves its bishop over here to d5, attacking this knight. White will then move up its knight to e5, and we add an additional attacker on that square by bringing up our knight to c6. And we'll take this pawn over here on e4, fortified by the knight, so the rook doesn't want to take it, but it's also forking the knight and the bishop. The nice thing about this is if white forgets that this bishop is guarding this queen, we get a nice free queen there. Next, we're going to look at the best variation for black, and that is when on the 7th move, knight goes to f3. So we do the exchange, we bring our bishop to e7, and white brings up the knight to f3. We then castle. White brings its bishop over here to e2. We bring our bishop over here to attack this pawn. If white pushes here to attack the bishop, we kick out over here to f4. And if they try to kick the bishop, we just trade the knight for the bishop. That puts us at our half point disadvantage in the most advantageous position for black. All in all, the exchange variation favors white heavily, but these lines will serve to help you as much as possible to get as equal as possible in your games moving forward. That's it for the exchange variation. In our next video, we're going to be going over the 4-pawn attack and how black can best navigate this dangerous attack by white. That video will be up here. We'll see you then, and you have a fantastic day. Bye.